This is the retard gear train. And if I just push that across, it should come back smoothly. That one's actually moving reasonably well at the moment, but it's sluggish. So it certainly needs to be cleaned, and we'll do that in the ultrasonic cleaner. I'll clean that in naphtha. Pop that to one side. This is the delay action, or the self timer. I'll just cock that. If I pull back this little lever here, that's what the internal cocking ring would act on. You can hear that running down. It's very hesitant. And that will certainly benefit from cleaning. So they will get cleaned in naphtha. Alright, I've got some naphtha in this jar. It's not exactly clear. It's been used once or twice. Got some water in the ultrasonic cleaner. And pop the jar in the water. Make sure the water doesn't come over the top. And this thing I'll set 10 minutes fine. I'll let that run for 10 minutes. And you won't need to wipe till black. Well, that's done. Just take that out of there. Take the excess moisture off and go away and deal with it in the other room. Here's our 2 speed trains. I'll just give them a quick rinse with some fresh naphtha. You can see a bit of graphite and stuff floating loose on the surfaces there. Just rinse that off with some naphtha. Blow that off. Same with the self timer. They're looking nice and shiny now. Okay, I can check how they work, and I'll lubricate those with some graphite powder. I'll try the retard gear train first. I want to see if it moves any smoother than it did previously. Can't say I notice a great deal of difference there. Let's try this. That's running much smoother. So certainly notice a big change with this, less with that. Right, some graphite powder. Just going to puff a bit of graphite powder in here. Work that a few times. That's certainly working a lot smoother. Just gather up some of this loose graphite powder here. Drop it into the gears of this self timer. Let a nudge to get it started. I'm holding back the lever here, which releases this mechanism. And at the moment that graphite's being crunched up between the teeth, which will lubricate the teeth. Some of the graphite powder will get into the the pivots too. That's running nice and smooth. I'll knock off that excess graphite and I'll blow that away. It's important to put the graphite on here like this when it's clean and dry, otherwise you could end up with it clumping up, particularly if there's any oil present. Of course there won't be because we've flushed this lot nicely. Okay, so those speed trains are good to go. I can pop those back in the shutter. So first I'll cock the shutter. I'll move this lever across, that would be set by the internal cocking ring, and I'll move the main cam into the cocked position, and that allows me to fit the retard gear train. That drops into place there. Need to pull this lever back so that the tab on the bottom of it is sits against the tab on the blade actuating ring, not sitting on top of it. If it's sitting on top of it, that'd be no good. Now we've got two long screws here. It's the shorter of those two is the pivot post at this end. Just check that that lever's free, it is. And that's screwed down lightly. Now the screw at the other end goes through an enlarged hole in the speed train that allows some adjustment. So I'll get this run down into the mechanism plate. You can possibly see there's a bit of movement there. Set that about halfway through its travel. Snug that screw up. And the other screw. If I release the shutter, let's see how it goes. Alright, well that certainly ran smoothly. It was somewhat faster than 1 second. So I need to bring the speed train in towards the centre for greater engagement of the main drive cam with the speed train. So I'll do that. Cock the shutter, cock this. That allows this arm to swing back out of the way so you can access the screw. Slacken that screw off. Move the speed train in towards the centre. Snug that screw up. That sounds more credible. We'll start with that position. That sounds good. That's considerably better than we started off with earlier. Right, so now the self-timer or delay action drops in here. The pin here has to come up through the slot on the arm of that self-timer, and this should seat down into the body of that shutter. Sometimes it requires a bit of wriggling to get it to seat correctly. Alright, let's cock the shutter and run this down. Okay. That seems to run smoothly. I'll close up the shutter and check how it all runs. I'll just clean these components with some naphtha. This is a speed settings cam plate, controls the actions of the levers in the shutter. There'll be graphite grease on the inside. That's done its job well, but we want to start with that nice and clean. You can see the grease that's come off there. The internal cocking ring that cocks the main spring and the flash sync mechanism. Just remove all that old grease, and just where those teeth are, I'm just running the cotton bud over that, rolling it as I go, so that it lifts any rubbish out from the teeth. It's the little pinion that couples to the internal cocking ring and moves the main cam. And this little lever stops you from being able to depress the shutter unless the shutter is actually cocked. That looks pretty good. And the last piece here is just our front retaining ring. I'll zoom out a bit, seeing hardly anything. Okay, let's get these off here, bring the shutter back in, and start with this. Get some molybdenum paste. I'm just putting a light wipe on the shaft. This little pinion, drop that into place. The tab on it drops between the tail of the spring and this piece on the lever. It sits like that. Here's the internal cocking ring. Taking molybdenum paste to give a wipe through the inside, usually just a wipe over the teeth, and this tab here which holds this piece cocked. That's all that's required there, it doesn't need much. Put this in position. I'll zoom you in a bit so you can see a bit better. There's a post here that this spring sits over. See if I can get that seated. Yep. I'll pull this round. Now, two things to watch here. One is to make sure that the tab on the self-timer is behind the tab there. And here, the engagement of this gear. The first tooth on the pinion should drop into the first space on that cocking ring. So that looks right. This little lever, just rotating its spring into the correct position. That sits on this post, and this tail of the spring has to be caught on the side towards the centre of this post there. Otherwise it won't have any tension. So it's usually I just lean in with my tweezers to hold the tail of that spring. If I could see what I was doing would help. Rotate the lever and it's dropped into position. Now it's sprung loaded. The speed settings cam plate. I usually take the molybdenum post, wipe through the centre, and these positions here, this cam that sets the position of the arm on the speed train, the retard gear train. Usually put a wipe through there, and that'll do. Let's put this back on the shutter. Check that the B lever here is not trapped underneath it. Move this round to the 1/8 of the second position. Cock it. Fire the shutter. And that's running a bit quick. I need to slow that shutter down slightly by adjusting the position of my retard gear train. Let's try 1/15 of a second. I'm not far away. I might go and test this. My shutter speed tester, which you never get to see. I'll just put the front retaining ring on here temporarily to hold all this together. We want to test the self-timer too, of course. Let's set the shutter to 1 second. Cock it. Set the self-timer. Release the shutter. Self-timer's running down. That should be a nice even buzz you get from that. Then the shutter should open and then close, like that. Okay, well I'll test my speeds on my shutter speed tester and then we'll move on from there. Well, a quick look confirmed my suspicions. The speeds are too fast, about half a stop too fast. So I'm going to see if I can adjust that speed train, the retard gear train. So I'll remove that little lever. I've got the shutter cocked, which allows me access to the screw here. I'll take out that, just loosen that screw, move the speed train across. It's pretty near hard against its stop now. And then put everything back in. Getting the position of the timing of these gears correct. I was just sitting one tooth out there before. And it looks right. This lever in position, making sure I get that spring held back. That's good. The cover in place. Make sure the B lever is not trapped underneath it. Put the retaining ring back on the front. Just check the action of this. Yeah, that's definitely slower. I'll go and test it again. Well, that took a little bit of toing and froing, but that speed is running nicely now. We'll set the self timer, set the shutter to run in a second. Let it run down. The 1 second speed is running just very slightly fast, certainly less than 10%. And the 15th and 8th are running just about spot on. And the 15th and the 8th speeds are usually indicative of all your other speeds. I'm not running through the whole set of speeds. I'm quite happy with the state of this. So that is good, and the shutter can be closed up now. I've just got to fit the shutter back into the case and then fit the front rings.